Right now, we have a really fun panel. It certainly has the most exciting name of the day. This is the Ready, Set, Audit panel. Is that how audits work? Yeah, probably. And this is gonna be really fun. So the idea here is that, look, every one of our clients gets audited either now or at some point in the future. Getting ready for a digital asset audit is incredibly difficult, time consuming. It's hard, it can be expensive. Like a lot of times we work with folks from the auditors where they're not familiar, they're not ready for 200 million transactions to get dumped on their plate. So the whole point of this panel is to pull together that information and get ready. Come on up, guys, I'll introduce you as you are stepping up. Leading the panel is our Chief Customer Officer, sorry, Ori Phillips. He's one of our longest time employees. Thanks, buddy. Betsy Hart is a partner at RSM. Come on up, Betsy. Betsy Hart is a partner at RSM Financial Consulting Practice and leads the solution set for emerging technology companies in RSM's Technical Accounting Consulting Group. Betsy has over 15 years of experience in assisting private and public companies through various stages of maturity and growth, from an early stage up through IPOs and SEC filings, everyone's favorite. Mark Lee, a longtime Bitwave friend, welcome to the stage, buddy. Mark Lee is an audit partner in Grant Thornton's West Region Blockchain Digital Asset Leader. He has 20+ years of experience in public accounting and private industry, and he has experience serving blockchain and cryptocurrency companies, including exchanges, trading platforms, wallets, custodians, miners, crypto investment funds. He's a CPA in San Francisco and board member with the Accounting Blockchain Coalition, a nonprofit blockchain digital asset organization. David Bird. David, first of all, I have to apologize because your bio took the biggest beating from the edit pen here, my friend, because David has an absolutely amazing background, PhD in psychology, in cognitive science and philosophy, excuse me, all these great things, but we had to condense it down. So David Bird is EY's blockchain strategy leader for assurance in the Americas and a partner in the financial services office audit practice in San Francisco. David leads the Digital Asset Research Center team, a team within EY dedicated to supporting assurance, tax, and consulting engagement. David is a CPA, and before becoming a CPA, he received his PhD from UC Davis in philosophy with a focus on cognitive science. It's super fun to talk to this guy. Thank you guys so much. Ori, take it away, buddy.
Awesome. Thank you. Thanks, Pat. Yeah, awesome. And thanks everyone for coming back after lunch. I think we took bets as to what the number of people would be after lunch, but excited to see you guys all here. So surely excited to talk about audit readiness. It is a topic that I think is pretty important. And we have a great group of panelists here to talk about it with. I think maybe I'll set a little bit of context, right, like on the importance of audits without separate from just the knowing what it is. I think it's usually evidence, I think, of maturity in our industry, right? In any industry is you have companies, number of companies that are getting audited, compliance, processes, that sort of thing. It's not usually the hottest topic amongst people, but definitely evidence of maturity as we think about our industry together. So excited to plow in here. I will start with probably the most basic question of this all is, when we think about audit readiness, what do we mean? And maybe I'll add something to it is, what do people typically miss? Paul, maybe you can kick us off there?
Love to talk about this. And I mean, I think we're equally qualified to cover this. Audit readiness, there's a lot of different types of audits you might have in mind, right? Security audit, forensic investigation, but primarily I think what we're focused on is the financial statement audit, right? And so that is something that all sorts of firms offer, and you usually don't just roll right into one completely ready just because there's a lot involved, right? And so who better to help you meet that target than people helping with audit readiness? So that's kind of the general topic. And if you look at, the type of firms that you're talking about, crypto natives or crypto startups, sometimes they don't look like startups. I mean, they're massive operations, but yet then when you look in there to see if they're ready for an audit, there's a lot missing. And so maybe just a few, and then we'll, yeah. So, sort of three categories of things that are very often missing in this industry for audits fall into this sort of, in my mind, policies, kind of legal area. financial reporting, and then kind of IT applications. And so by policies, it'd really be great to see some shops that had, strong policies around governance, some sort of independent oversight. I mean, if you look at this last year and all the activities that occurred, you'll see the absence of a lot of that. It'd be great to have policies around the management of customer accounts, policies around if you have an investment strategy. What is that? Are you just going to allocate, funds anywhere? What about third parties, counterparty diligence, so things like this? It'd be great to see some sort of structure around that in place before you roll right into the audit. A strong finance function. Right? Obviously, shops, I have a controller, I have a CFO, I've got someone that does the accounting, but really someone with experience in financial reporting, the related internal controls around that area would be nice. And the last area is really just IT infrastructure. And I'd be curious what you guys think about some of this stuff. Because you'd think, well, it's a crypto shop, right? Clearly, they're deep in IT. Well, yes, but IT applications for finance and financial reporting? Not always, right? Some of this stuff's super manual. So it would be great if we saw some controls around that, right? IT, general controls, IT applications. So anyway, those are just a few things that come to mind when I think about this.
Yeah, no, Mark.
Yeah, I was going to say, I think everything you said is appropriate. I also think you want to assess where you're at in terms of the growth of your company. If you're a pure startup versus a bit more mature, 2 years, 3 years into your life cycle, as David said, if you're early stage, you definitely need to kind of look at some of those areas that he talked about, the controls, they're just the basic books, controls and processes around getting the information that you need and things like that. But without getting into all the details, I'd say, one of the things I would say is just where you're at, and then relative to where you're at, figure out what's right for you, right? There's a cost and benefit to it. And, if you're a pure startup, you maybe start with few personnel, but as to David said, the few personnel that you hire, you probably want to make sure they understand, have the experience and this knowledge. As you you're mature, then you probably want to beef up your personnel a bit more, right? Because digital asset, as you all know, it's not a very easy industry at times when it comes to financial information. So that's all I would say for now.
Yeah, and I think just to build on that, when you really think about a high growth entity that's really going from build mode into more of a financial statement compliance mode, there's a lot of changes that come to an organization that really need to be thought through. And I think to the point on, it's not standard, right? There's a lot of things to think through and that have complexities around bringing in other parts of the organization as well. So even when you're thinking about those policies and building those out, whether it's a technical accounting policy or a controls policy, it's oftentimes more of a whole organization view also. And so, I think, this point was hit on earlier when you think about all the people that might need to be involved into building out a policy and really understanding the technical and the token flow, the digital asset flow, your organization's view in the ecosystem, but also the partners that you're working with, that can vary a lot. And so one of the first things when you think about is really what's my organization, how do I map this out, right? Making sure that I can bring in the full organization as well. This is important.
No, that's great. I mean, Betsy, you have the privilege of being more on the consulting side of things, right? And you're coming into various types of situations. It might be helpful if you share, what do you typically see in a current state when you show up versus after you're kind of done with the project. So what are some of the things you see when you jump in?
Yeah, absolutely. And I think from that perspective, it's you come in current state, and that can vary back to the point of which stage you're at. And even when you think about a financial statement audit, what's driving that? Is that, regulatory? Is it, just raised a new round of funding? Is it an investor requirement that, all of a sudden you now have this audit requirement? Really making sure that you're thinking through those things. And I think even thinking from, current state, thinking through legal structure, what is my reporting entity? Thinking about various types of relationships where, a lot of businesses are set up very intentionally with different subsidiaries or different entities doing different operations, really taking a step back and zooming out at that current state, thinking about the organization structure and what each entity is doing, and really then building out from there. What are my accounting policies, and how do I really need to map that out? So in terms of, and I think also when you think about current state, a lot of the existing, when I think about people, processes, and technology, is not necessarily, really well equipped for Web3 companies, right? And so really thinking through the tech stack and, improvements that can be made from that perspective as well.
Yeah, no, super helpful. And Mark or Paul, or both of you probably will.
David.
Sorry, David. How do you think about situations where somebody has come in and done some readiness work? Is there a big difference? First of all, do you see that a lot? And then the second part of it is there some difference, I guess, when you're coming in from an onboarding perspective that you're like, I'm glad they did that, that sort of thing. So do you see a difference when you come in from an audit perspective?
So is the question more, what do we look for on an onboarding, for an onboarding process?
Yeah. Well, maybe my first half of it is, do you typically see a difference with companies that have done some kind of readiness work or not? And then the second part is what you're looking for from an onboarding perspective.
Yeah, I can take the first portion, you can add the other.
Hopefully the answer is yes.
Yeah, no, definitely. If companies gone through a readiness process, right? I've talked to independent auditors or accountants and kind of dive through all the issues and their businesses and the various processes they have and what they need to account for and all the technical issues. Definitely when they come to us at Grant, I can see the difference between night and day. Just the kind of questions we ask, which I'm sure David will get into some of the due diligence questions. But yeah, I would definitely encourage you. And there's no one better than Betsy here at RSM, giving her some bonus points here. She helps a lot of companies to get ready, and definitely you can see the difference. Like I said, I would prefer to work with someone that has that process in place, and just based on the questions I ask, you can tell that those are in place. So it does, at least from that standpoint.
Oh yeah, and even before getting to the list of sort of things you look for, yeah, any help is better than no help, and I do think we see a sort of the bar being cleared here. Why? Well, because what's the target? You want to get ready for an audit? Okay, well, what are they going to look at? Well, they're going to look at, so what's your business? How do you make money? What's going to be material to the audit? It's really about the financial statements, right? That's kind of the scope of what we're talking about. And so which of these lines of the balance sheet are going to be material? How about the income statement? How are you generating money? What's that coming in? That really is a guide to what should be focused on, because that's what your investors and others are going to be interested in when looking at these financial statements. And so, fortunately, the audit industry is somewhat standardized, different accounting frameworks and auditing standards. And so, yeah, I think that really the help that we're seeing on the audit readiness, certainly help that the EY is not itself doing, is absolutely appropriate and crazy helpful. So to answer, just kind of close the first one. As far as actually onboarding an audit client, and I know this sounds like a lot often, because, if you're a crypto startup and you're talking about all of these controls and these different roles and segregating duties and policies on everything, you might think, like, how am I going to afford that? And an absolutely realistic, concern that I think Mark was also addressing, like, as you grow, you might not even need an audit yet, right? But the thing is that in this space, even if you're a startup, your model is sometimes, from day one, being a fiduciary of assets for other people, right? Or for other entities. And so you're kind of acting, like a bank or a custodian or a treasurer or whatever, right? And so if you're holding other people's assets, then there needs to be some controls around that. And that's kind of why that bar is a little higher. But just as far as onboarding clients, some of the usual stuff is want to know, what does your business look like over time, right? Do we have confidence that this is going to be a growing business, that we're going to invest in that relationship? What's your source of funding, right? Investors, you just coming in this, it's your own money, or, oh no, we've had this round, or, oh, we've already generated revenue, things like that. Depending on the model, if you have retail, then you need to look at, AML, KYC sort of things. Yeah. Have that org chart ready, right? The legal structure. Where are you operating? What jurisdictions are you operating in? Have you sort of assessed which regulatory agencies you're going to fall under? Are you compliant with those? Is there a plan? I mean, there's a lot of things in the checklist, and I won't put us all to sleep by going through all of those.
Can you tell that he's a professor?
Long ago. Yeah.
No.
I think that, does that kind of help?
Yeah, just a few more things. I think it's great that David gave you the details, right? But just from a high level at Grant, right? We would ask you questions around KYC, as he said. Do you understand your business? Can you explain to us your business? I think really big is the org chart. There's been so many occasions where I would jump on a call and all we have is the prospective client says, oh, there's only one entity. Then later when I send out the PBC or the request list and ask them for org chart, I see a bunch of other ones sitting around. So it's just really getting your hands around that you understand your business, you understand your org chart, you start to understand everything, right? Because that's going to help us get a feel, at least initial feel. I'm sure all the firms are like this, is that you have your things in together, right? And if you come across not having your things together, it kind of freaks us out a little bit because then we don't know whether you understand what you're doing, right? So, and not to say that you don't, but it just helps us. So that's another area that I would say focus on more as well if you're seeking an audit or other things too.
Yeah, no, that's great input. I'll flip back to you, Betsy, again. So they talked about a lot of maybe tone at the top kind of content. Practically speaking, when you come in and you're doing sort of like an audit readiness project, are you asking people to put together documents that document what their company is? Are you what do those deliverables maybe tangibly look like?
Yeah, that's a great question. And honestly, sometimes when you hear the word audit readiness too, I think if you're a company that is not audit ready or has not been through the process yet, even that term can sometimes be, you almost have to think about it a step before then too. So when I think about, a lot of this, it's really accounting and finance optimization, right? And coming out with a plan to ultimately be audit ready. And sometimes to the point that really is done in stages. So when we think about that, there's a lot that can fall under that bucket. And, sometimes it is org structure. Sometimes it's really, coming and assisting with those type of documents. A lot of companies too go through an assessment, right, of what's current state and what needs to change and to ultimately be audit ready, and how do we map that out and help prioritize as well. But I think it could be different too, based on the needs. Also, technical accounting policies, right? When you think about that, to David's point, oftentimes when you think about revenue recognition or token incentives or complex transactions, you really want to make sure that's really thought through, not only with the guidance that is available today, but really the mechanics of the flow. And so one thing that often is a great starting point too is even just like a product flow diagram that really can help explain the business, and we find that to be a really helpful, some companies already have that. Some companies, it really helps to start build that out, and we can help with that as well. And that's a great first step for, those audit conversations. And when you come into that, you're prepared with, a diagram of what's going on, and then also, which entities are involved, which third parties am I working with? Because, back to that point earlier, I think there's a lot of companies in this space contributing to the ecosystem in a lot of different ways. And so means many different things for many different requirements, whether that's regulatory, accounting. So it can really vary. And so it's a lot of, company dependent.
I would love to just quickly follow up on something you mentioned there about what do you call it, the product diagram or product flow. That would really helps in the onboarding process because and we're talking about crypto, right? We're talking about digital assets and Web3. And if you're in this space, not necessarily, but usually digital assets are involved. You're holding them, there's some activity, you're staking them, they play a role in your business or your customer's business. And so, when you think about audit and the target, your auditor is going to need to obtain sufficient appropriate audit evidence. That's the lingo, right? And so what is that? Well, that's just, getting data. Maybe it's independently gathered. Maybe it's gathered through and with you. Maybe it's through third parties you're using. And so getting that data, well, how do we know if it's available? How do we know what we need? Well, seeing some kind of map. Like maybe maybe you're launching a new blockchain or a protocol, and you're going to play a role in the gaming industry, and there's going to be NFTs involved, but there's a token, and there's a lot going on, right? You see some of these, and so I will often first ask for, could you just walk me through the sort of flow of funds? Okay, so who's got the coin? Do you have the coin? In what wallet? Is it going to this third party? Okay, who are they? Am I going to be able to get information that I need about you from them, right? So again, we can go into a lot of detail here, but that kind of like mapping of just how things flow really helps that auditor understand, am I going to be able to do this thing? Am I going to get the information I need to sign off?
Yeah, and I want to follow up on that a little bit more, David. Does it matter the nature of the protocols that you're dealing with? Does it make it more complex, less complex? Do you dig to that level? Or is it, I'm auditing, I have a framework for auditing, and does it make a difference? I mean, some complex DeFi pools versus not, protocols and specific digital asset types, do they matter from an audit perspective?
Well, I don't know if that's a leading question or not, but I will take it. The bait has been taken. Yeah, it absolutely does. And of course, I'd be curious to see to what extent this matters, and what you guys see. But yeah, if you're a company operating in the space, maybe it's only Bitcoin. Like, we just worked with Bitcoin. Great, that was the first. It's very well understood. There's all sorts of fancy things you can do on Bitcoin now, but generally very well understood. There's a lot of tooling out there, blocky spores, everyone handles that. Okay, well then move to other protocols, other things that do introduce more complexity. Take, for instance, a privacy coin. Yeah, well, we want to protect the confidentiality of our and our customers' transactions, so we use, fill in the blank, your favorite privacy coin. Well, is it so private that your auditor can't actually get visibility into that, right? So
yes.
So yes. So that happens, and it's not that it can't be figured out often with a little lead time and depending on protocol, but that complexity, which can come in the form of privacy. We talk a lot about zero knowledge proofs and how great they're enabling scalability, privacy. That's great. It's good. I'm not being sarcastic. I'm supportive, but it does introduce complexity. Does your auditor understand that technology well enough to be able to assess what are the risks here? How do I know this data that you're providing me is complete and accurate? Oh, I see it's actually a ZK roll from this other thing. Well, does your auditor even have the expertise to understand that? Do they need special tools that they have to develop to independently verify your LP position on some, in some pool or a DEX or lending? Yeah. So it goes without saying.
I was going to add to what David and what your question, or that it's important because depending on what network you're in or what protocol you're in, whatever you want to call them these days, at Grant we do run our own nodes, which I think a lot of the firms do here as well, to verify independently. We don't just go to the public blockchain and type in your address and say, ta-da, it's sitting in the Bitcoin website. We run our own data per se. I'm sure EY does too. So I think it's important to know what protocol you're in and understanding it, because if we can't run our own nodes, then we can't do the audit. And that's just how it is, at least at Grant. Can't speak for all the firms, but I'm sure they pretty much follow suit here. And so
I would amend that slightly, just because that's the position of strength and confidence. Yeah. If you're running your own node and you know how that operates, you have direct access to the source of truth, right, in the blockchain world, that you just can't do any better than that, right? But there are a lot of protocols out there, a lot of blockchains out there, a lot of different nodes. And are we suggesting that every auditor to serve this space must have the IT capacity to run a node on every blockchain? Well, no, right? That's not going to work. But not everything's material. It's an audit, right? You're not auditing down to the cent. You're auditing down to what would be material to an investor, to our user of the financial statements. And so that can help guide things. Now, there's a long tail, and each auditor is going to have their own sort of strategy for obtaining that sufficient appropriate audit evidence, right? And if you're not running a node yourself, you might still do something. You might look at a blocky spore. Oh, but who's running that? How do I know this information is reliable? Okay, you might look at several. And if you can independently triangulate the same data on chain, well, that's some evidence, right? Can we tie that to other forms of evidence, other parts of that transaction? So there's not just one way to approach it, but Mark, you really pointed out the best way, if you can.
No, absolutely. I'm speaking material transactions here, obviously. If it's a small transaction, we don't care, right? And if you have one Bitcoin and I don't audit it, that's fine. That's $60,000, not a big deal, right? So absolutely. It's only large transactions in your network. So yes. Can you tell he's a professor?
No, great introducing that concept of materiality into it. Betsy, I'll pick on something that they've said. So let's say I'm in the audience here. I'm probably in the accounting function of some sort. My business is doing something pretty complicated in crypto, right? But I'm not the product manager. I'm not the engineer that wrote the code to do this. I am in accounting. And so I'm in this spot where my auditor wants to understand my business. I am probably the face to the auditor, but I don't have all the knowledge of like what's happening. How do I navigate that, right? In terms of, being the man in the middle or woman in the middle sort of thing.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think, right, wrong, or indifferent, sometimes when you're in building products or building, new technologies, it's not always built for thinking about reporting and thinking about accounting. And I think we could probably all attest to that. And so back to even just overarching preparation too, when you think about data completion and data completeness, thinking through all those things early is really helpful so that you don't get to a point too where, your auditors are reviewing transactions and then you get to a point that, the data's not complete or, you're not able to validate through testing. And so with that, when a finance manager is working through accounting policy, that's really where the need for the product, the engineering team, we often do see that in terms of bringing various areas of the business, even to the sales team, right? Really understanding from how that process starts, how it ends, and then how it ultimately impacts accounting policy too. And so I think there's obviously building out your accounting policy, but then also marrying that with what's the code, what's actually happening technically, and then also that those two things jive on a go-forward basis too, because it needs to be scalable, and it needs to be, the finance team also has to understand, how am I going to pull this data on a regular basis? How am I going to book these entries? And so it's I think those two interactions between the accounting and finance function and the product and engineering team is really crucial.
No, great. And maybe I'll add something here, and you can do a quick comment on it, is how do you handle when things change? So again, I'm in finance, and we're in this super fast-moving industry. Product is doing what it's doing. That communication, that, what's...
Yeah, I think I think given the industry and given how quickly things change, the evolution and the fast pace, it almost has to be a regular connection point too, with making sure the finance function, and really when you think about readiness or accounting and finance optimization, there's ways consultants can come in, and there's also ways that the business can do those roles, right? And so making sure you have regular connection points on just what's happening with the business, what's happening with the product team, because oftentimes, sometimes there are accounting conclusions reached where when you really go into the code or when you really go and dig, it could be that it really took another conversation to really understand what's happening, right? And so that's where that linkage between the two is really crucial.
I would second, third, or fourth this topic. There's just so many calls that you jump on the phone with a client and, your audit, or you're trying to help them get ready for audit, and, you're engaging with the finance folks, right? And backgrounds in accounting, CPA, or whatever the framework is, right? And then you just start asking questions that, because of the nature of these assets, really rely on, okay, who's running the wallets, who's tracking this stuff, how are these organized, and almost every single conversation, unless they brought someone on from, engineering or security or something like that, or someone that has line of sight into that stuff, you're just going to have to come back and do the call later. Not that you want to, use the valuable time of your engineers on every technical accounting memo called. No, that's not necessary. But very often, the finance folks, it's wonderful if they really do have their head around this stuff. But very often, they just don't know. They just don't know. When you say, hey, are you getting these assets on-chain between these and these customers? Or how about corporate versus customer coin? And, I mean, just asking these questions, they often don't know. And they should. And this is usually a trigger for them then to discover and then know that going forward. But yeah, having people like you that know I need to be in almost constant connection with my technical team, not only for present state, but for as it evolves. That could be super helpful.
Yeah, no, fantastic. And Mark, I'll ask this question. How much is too much information for the auditor? And maybe there's no answer to it, but because we're talking about involving product and engineering, and when is it too much? And Betsy, maybe you have a view on advising the accounting team on, where do you draw that line? Or maybe is it full transparency? Is it that sort of thing? How much is too little, too much? That sort of thing.
Yeah, that's a great question. But before I answer that, I think what's really important is to understand the difference between data and information. So as you all know, data is just you download it from the system, and there's a bunch of data. Information is how you translate data into meaningful, meaningful information or meaningful understanding. So as part of the audit, we're not looking for data. That's great that you're pulling that up, and that maybe to your question, there's always a lot of data, right? You should pull all the data you can. But what's important is really translating that data into information that's auditable and also that it makes sense. And you understand what your business, you understand your revenue transaction, and this is where, what Betsy and Paul, no, just kidding, David. I'm just getting back at you. So, they can help you with that. As GT can help you as well. But the point being that another service provider can help you get that data and translate into information that is useful at the same time auditable. I think that's really what's important, is be able to translate that. I work with companies that are startups to more mature to public companies, and you can see the difference between the startups. They deliver you data. They don't provide you information, and I think there's the difference between the two, right? So, and how much? I mean, it's never too much for the auditors as long as it makes sense. And I think when you overwhelm the auditors with all this information, it's not that helpful. Then it just becomes it's just overburden us, right? So it makes no sense.
There's sort of a related topic on information you might not want to share with your auditor, and there's going to be some hesitancy. Like, I've talked with a potential audit client just last week, and they said, look, if you're going to ask me questions around the wallets, I'm not going to be able to tell you much. That's not good because you kind of need to know, do these assets exist, or you have rights or control over them? You have to answer those questions. But I think there's sometimes a miscommunication. It's not like your auditor needs to know your private key. I hope you're not sharing your private key with anybody, right? I don't even need to know who in particular your company has access or signs off, IMAVIN, and all, that's sensitive, secure information. But a general understanding, just for it's in this type of wallet. Yes, there are these types of controls. There's these compensating controls. We have a process around that, right? Hopefully better managed than balancing my phone, right? And so those are the sorts of things that your auditor is going to want to know and needs to know in order to sign off, right? They don't need to risk your security in that sense. But I don't know, Betsy.
Yeah, no, and I think it comes back to, absolutely agree with the point on, that kind of information is really crucial, right, just around the processes and how that all works. But really coming back to making sure that, there is a process in place. And I wouldn't say there's too much data, but just coming back to a really efficient, rather than going through it in stages and thinking about the accounting and then thinking about the data, it's just kind of bringing everybody together for an initial conversation really just creates efficiencies. And so I think it's almost the order of how you do it too, right? Of just even conversations with the auditors. And I will say that relationship with the auditors too, it's a full between client, consultant, auditor is really helpful, right? And just talking through, just because we understand we're all on the same page then, right? And there's a lot of efficiencies that can be gained from that.
Awesome. I think that's probably a perfect spot to wrap it up. So thank you so much, David, Mark, Betsy. Really appreciate you being on the panel here.
Thank you.
Thank you.